I am deeply aware of the burden of heritage as well as the price to be paid for the survival of the dynasty. Those echoes, if uttered in a sublime context, would reverberate like thunder through the ancient corridors of power. Imagine a scenario where millennia-old protocols are overturned. In this hypothetical model, the position of the person beside the throne, a seemingly untouchable position, suddenly becomes a variable to be discarded. The head of the monarchy, with a somber yet sharp tone like a surgical knife, made a decisive move to protect the system's survival. In that tense atmosphere, body language spoke louder than 1,000 words. The heir to the throne and his partner, representatives of the system's future, unconsciously clasped hands. It was not just a handshake, but the forging of a new alliance in the face of the collapse of the old order. They understood that when a major piece moved, the chessboard was forever changed. But what motivation could have triggered such a fierce defense mechanism from someone who had patiently waited for 7 decades? What lay behind the velvet curtain of diplomatic protocol? The answer probably doesn't lie on the surface, but deep within the black box of court intrigues, top-secret biological records, and a communication signal that inadvertently exposed it all. Before we unravel the earthquake simmering within the Commonwealth, let's reflect on a fundamental psychological principle. Have you ever placed complete trust in an alliance, only to discover that within that very security lies a fatal vulnerability? That is the essence of the tragedy we are dissecting. This is not simply a family story. It is a lesson in risk management, manipulation, and the price to pay when a power gamble fails. The data trails lead us to 2 sensitive files, encrypted communication protocols used overnight, and an invisible link stretching from London to the other side of the ocean. Stay focused, because the picture we are about to piece together will completely change how you perceive the workings of a modern institution. Let's return to the eye of the storm. A moment that could send the internet into a frenzy and plunge global public opinion into a thoughtful silence. Under the harsh glare of the media, the leader emerges. Despite bearing the marks of a prolonged internal biological battle, the aura of rulership never wavered. The shadow on his face was not merely a matter of lighting, but the weight of a declaration about to be made. A declaration meant to rebuild order from the ashes of betrayal. Do you believe a powerful empire can collapse because of a single breach of trust? Let me know your thoughts below. And don't just observe, join this investigation by subscribing and turning on notifications. The evidence about to be revealed will completely change the way you see everything. That voice, the sound of a man who had spent his entire life operating the machinery of monarchy, rang out. But this time, the command was not issued to preserve, but to terminate. I abdicate. Those 2 words, like a deactivation kill code, instantly threw the entire media system into overload. Cameras trembled, and chaos erupted in silence as millions of mobile devices vibrated simultaneously. This was not a repetition of Edward VIII's abdication for love. This was a rupture in the very process of succession itself. But the script did not end there. A master strategist always saves the most decisive move for the final moment. The leader's gaze shifted, cold as tempered steel, locking onto the figure standing in the position of queen. Clad in an emerald ceremonial gown, a symbol of royal stability and composure, she was awaiting a smooth transfer of power to the next generation. She had prepared herself for the role of a dignified supporter. But the system did not execute according to that programming. What followed was a direct attack on the existing power structure, stripping away all titles and privileges. The entire room reeled. Even those trained in emotional control, like the young heir, couldn't hide their shock at this sudden shift in course. The accusation wasn't about sentiment, but about a serious violation of data integrity. The hypothesis here is a high-level manipulation conspiracy, interfering with biometric records and manipulating medical diagnoses to control the leader when they are at their weakest. It's a usurpation of power based on information asymmetry. Rewind that video to analyze the body language where the truth is revealed. The moment the perfect facade is shattered. Not mere fear, but a reality denial. The wide-open eyes reflect the collapse of an intellect that had calculated every move, every risk, every contingency. Except one thing. The variable came from the very person she believed she had complete control over. Try putting yourself in the mindset of a master manipulator. How much coldness and meticulous calculation does it take to rewrite a spouse's life record while they are struggling for survival? What motivation is strong enough to drive a person across that crimson line? The press conference room crumbled in a chaotic rush of information. But amidst that storm, a stark truth was revealed. The ceremonial structure of the royal court, the most exquisite porcelain glaze, had collided with a cruel reality and shattered. Two figures representing the next generation, William and Catherine, undertake a strategic retreat. Their silence is not emptiness, but a message more powerful than any written text. They move as if evacuating from a crumbling structure, because, in a certain analytical sense, they are the epicenter of this chain reaction. In an instant, information transcends all digital boundaries. London, New York, Tokyo, financial and cultural centers are shaken simultaneously. But the most remarkable aspect of this sociological phenomenon is crowd polarization. Public opinion was torn into two opposing hypotheses, a necessary purge. The public hailed this action as the victory of principle over sentiment, a leader refusing to let the throne be compromised by toxic personal alliances, a cold political move. The opposition questioned, was this an internal purge, where the succession faction exploited the king's declining health to eliminate rivals? Amidst the clamor of millions of hypotheses, the core question remains unanswered. What data was powerful enough to trigger an order to destroy the relationship in public? To find that hidden variable, we must follow a process. Time travel. Let's turn back the clock to T-7 days. Location, Sandringham, an absolute safe zone where surveillance cameras are neutralized. It's a symbolic moment, the anniversary of their alliance. Despite the immense biological stress, the leader performs a classic romantic ritual, an exquisite item wrapped in velvet, a brooch. He wishes to personally present it, a gesture affirming their enduring bond. This is the climax of the tragedy, an act of absolute trust performed on the brink of devastating betrayal. Let's re-establish the spatial context. A powerful figure walks in the shadows of historical corridors. In this rare moment, he sheds the armor of a monarch to return to his most primal face, a husband seeking connection. The flickering lanterns not only illuminate the portraits of his ancestors, but also symbolize the fragile hope amidst the storm of illness. But the law of tragedy is that it always strikes when defenses are at their lowest. The first signal of anomaly came through hearing. A familiar voice, once programmed to convey comfort and warmth, suddenly shifted frequency. It became cold, clipped, and commanding. This was not the tone of a wife, but the voice of an operator issuing directives. A primal defense mechanism, what we call intuition or a sixth sense, immediately triggered a freeze response just outside the oak door. And the information gathered afterward is the key to unraveling the entire collapse. I need a report that's more serious than it actually is. That's the decoded message. The person on the other end of the line, Dr. H, the one holding the key to the king's life. Let's analyze the ruthlessness in this tactic. This is an act of adjusting medical parameters. The plan wasn't to poison the body, but to poison. Company profile. By instructing doctors to use technical terms such as systemic exhaustion or indefinite isolation required, but the shock didn't stop there. A new connection was immediately established. The tone shifted from cold to excited, a sign of someone about to checkmate. Prepare the documents for the committee. Don't let the hesitant get in the way. This was the decisive move, the coup in writing. The plan was to exploit the king's exaggerated health condition to activate a provisional regency council. In practical terms, while the king was isolated by fabricated medical diagnoses, actual governing power would be transferred to the regent. A reign from behind the velvet curtain. Imagine the psychological weight on the man standing outside the door. He is witnessing a scenario where his spouse and most trusted doctor conspire to usurp his power. The velvet box in his hands, a symbol of love and affection, slips from fingers numb with the truth. Its fall is not merely physical, but the shattering of a decades-long alliance. The velvet box hits the carpet, a physically weightless fall, yet carrying the destructive force of a psychological explosion. Let's analyze this symbol. It's not just a gift left behind. It's the unilateral termination of a decades-long agreement. A choice that defied all norms, traditions, and ancestral approvals, now reduced to a tool in the game of another's interests. But this is where the historical data about the individual becomes crucial. Instead of collapsing as predicted by the opponent, the subject made a tactical retreat. The blue box remains as a silent witness. From this point, a counterintelligence operation is activated. Publicly, the message being conveyed is strict medical rest. Media signals are weak, and approval ratings fluctuate. But this is the perfect disguise. Behind the velvet curtain of isolation lies not resignation, but the intense focus of someone forged in military discipline and inheriting the silent reign of a great predecessor. Intelligence assessment. Every space is under surveillance. The adversary is not far away, but within the closest circle. Therefore, every action must be absolutely precise. Operational location, the Royal Library, where the system's memory is stored, a rare safe zone. Here, the data verification process began. What emerged was a shock to information governance. Under the desk lamp, two files lay side by side. The same subject, the same authentication seal of the medical director, yet the contents depicted two opposing realities, one confirming stable indicators, fully under control, ensuring executive capacity, the other portraying a scenario of systemic collapse, nervous exhaustion, and a recommendation for indefinite suspension of authority. Recommendation for indefinite suspension of authority. This comparison leads to an undeniable conclusion. The opposing side manipulated key personnel to create a manufactured crisis. The ultimate goal, using medical procedures to legitimize the transfer of power. But identifying the tool, the fabricated documents, is not enough. The scale of the network must be determined. Who are the other knots in this system? This is where another analytical mind comes in, one known for its obsessive meticulousness. A new variable appears in the equation. Catherine, Princess of Wales. During a routine administrative information review, A task that seemed monotonous, the first variable surfaced. Subject of observation: Catherine. With the acuity of someone attuned to fine details, she detected an anomalous communication pattern. Electronic signals exchanged between the Queen and medical specialist H did not follow standard administrative time protocols. They appeared during late-night gray zone hours using highly encrypted language. There were no medical terms, only parameters of scheduling and logistical arrangements. Then an attachment appeared like a blazing red exclamation mark on the radar screen. Protocol B, Plan B. An instinctive alert of an internal security threat was triggered. The data was immediately transferred to the air. Consider William's position. He was under dual pressure from two fronts: the safety of his father and the burden of executing the transfer of power. His trust in the stability his stepmother was supposed to provide was crushed by reality. This evidence landed like a sledgehammer on the very foundation of that trust. From that moment on, a special task force spanning 3 generations was formed in the shadows: Charles, William, and Catherine. They no longer operated as a family, but as an internal intelligence unit. To confront a sophisticated conspiracy, they were forced to deploy modern operational methods, using end-to-end encrypted communication channels, disabling physical surveillance points within the palace, and analyzing metadata and server logs. And the result of the data mining process is, the smoking gun is irrefutable evidence, a digital audio recording. When the recording was played, it wasn't just sound, it was a verdict. The subject's voice rang out, cold and calculating, directing the inflating of risk indicators to trigger the mechanism for removing the leader. It was irrefutable evidence that manipulating the constitutional process. The intelligence data package, including audio recordings, corroborating reports, and email sequences, was placed on the king's desk. Let's pause the analysis for a moment. We've just touched the black box containing the most brutal truth. Before we enter the room where the judgment of conscience is carried out, I need a confirming signal from you. If you also feel outraged by this cold-blooded manipulation and support William's efforts to clean up the system, please hit the like button immediately to empower justice. And don't forget to subscribe to officially join our intelligence network. Your action will help the algorithm bring this truth to more people. Now, let's see how the king will handle this heartbreaking data package. The feeling of hearing your spouse view you as a technical obstacle to be eliminated, rather than a human being, is undoubtedly a deep traumatic experience. But the protocol of a king doesn't allow for emotional breakdown. A cold decision is made. Take the final ethics test. Not a quarrel, but an opportunity for the opponent to confess. A final favor before judgment is carried out. The setting: a closed living room where the silence is heavier than lead. The subject enters with the confidence of someone who has been operating the political chessboard for decades. She relied on social engineering and the allure of the past to conceal the truth. But the king's tactics had changed. He didn't immediately release the evidence. Instead, he used his gaze, a blend of the sadness of betrayal and supreme authority, to conduct a soft interrogation. How is my health? And was there anything noteworthy about your conversation with Dr. H? The answer he received was a perfect denial. A slight smile, a dismissive wave. That was the moment the psychological trap snapped shut. She chose the path of denial, unaware that she was standing on the edge of a truth already exposed. Faced with a moral test, the subject activated a classic defense mechanism: denial and blame shifting. She constructed an alternate reality in which the act of power seizure was disguised as fear for personal safety. The attack vectors were even redirected toward invisible, jealous rivals. But for a seasoned observer like Charles, the complete absence of the regret parameter in her emotional data was the final answer. No remorse, only calculation. It was a moment of clear recognition. This wasn't a random systemic error, but a deliberately designed feature. The conclusion was reached. Personal pain was insignificant compared to systemic risk. A monarchy could not operate on a foundation of deception. Immediately, the highest administrative order was issued. This was not a delay, but an absolute transfer of power. Charles, seated at the historic desk, carries out the final operations to disconnect himself from the network of authority. An abdication decree, transferring administrative rights to the next generation, William V. A handwritten letter is sealed. It is never sent, instead archived as a dead file, a witness to a chapter of life that has come to a close. Consider this trade-off. 70 years waiting to get the system up and running, and then abandoning it in less than 2 years. The motivation isn't weakness, but awakening, sacrificing power to protect the honor of the institution. In the days that followed, Britain underwent a complete software upgrade. The coronation of King William V was not merely a ceremony, but a system purge procedure. The image of King William and Queen Catherine on the balcony is not merely a symbol of power, but a message of integrity restoration. The cheering crowd celebrates not just a new monarch, but the palpable sense that a critical security vulnerability has been patched. Global media shifts its tone, from scandal-driven headlines to in-depth analyses of the former king's moral courage. While the new system operates smoothly in the spotlight, a silent purge unfolds elsewhere. The former queen, now an entity stripped of all royal identifiers, receives the order to exit the center of power. No noise, no farewell. Such is the price paid when a toxic variable is expelled by the immune system of history. This is a hypothetical story, but it raises a very real question about power and responsibility. The question I want to leave with you is this: what do you think is the greatest legacy of a leader? The length of time they hold power, or the way they choose to let it go in order to protect core values? Share your view with a number. Press 2. Holding on to power until the very end is true strength. Press 5. Knowing when to let go is true greatness. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so we can continue decoding the next analytical case files together. There is no code of honor, no escort protocol, and absolutely no acknowledgement. The subject walks through corridors that were once the stage of her authority, but now her access has been permanently revoked. Her luggage is reduced with ruthless efficiency. An unmarked vehicle quietly departs through the rear gate, the route reserved for elements that must be removed from the historical chain without noise. There is no glance back. The interface on the woman's face, once displaying ambition, pride, and defiance, has now switched to a blank state. An old system has officially been powered down. For those who once stood at the center of power, there is now isolation at remote coordinates. No more spotlight, only silence, a digital world sentence of erasure through forgetting. At his private estate, Charles initiates the recovery process. He accepts relinquishing the hardware, the crown, and the incompatible software, old relationships, in exchange for a core value, clean conscience data. Inner balance is finally restored after decades of systemic interference. In the silence, a historical audit is underway. Charles's memoir is not merely a narrative, but a data set that decodes every turning point. Security vulnerabilities, the way coordinated units, William Cate, protected the system, the algorithm of duty, the painful choice to place national responsibility above personal, emotional variables. The image of the sealed letter that was never sent is the most haunting line of code, representing secrets forever left in the past to safeguard the dynasty's future. In the final entry, Charles draws a core lesson. Love can be a noise-inducing algorithm that blurs logic, but justice is an absolute constant. He accepted the destruction of his personal happiness to achieve the highest possible resolution of truth. The removal of the Camilla variable was only the beginning. Analysts uncovered a transoceanic sabotage network linking London to the California network node, Montecito. This was not an isolated incident, but a systematic architecture of subversion aimed at the very core of the monarchy. The network's new objective is exceptionally sophisticated: an attack on the legitimacy of the future heir, George. This operation employed fabricated data, falsified records and disinformation, and a manufactured doubt campaign aimed at undermining the biological lineage and traditions of the institution. Catherine, the firewall, activated a high-precision investigative protocol. By applying the follow-the-money method, she cracked through complex layers of financial transactions used to fund the smear campaign. The terminal point of this transaction chain traced back to entities linked to senior personnel within an office in California. At the command center in Montecito, a figure watches events unfold through a live screen, witnessing a collapse of perception as layers of masks are stripped away. She believed that geographical distance and intermediary shields would provide protection, but in the digital age, nothing is safe when the opponent controls the source data. After a strategic miscalculation triggers a cascading failure, she activates an evidence destruction protocol. Yet in the era of cloud computing and digital forensics, total erasure is an illusion. The data has already been transmitted and cannot be recalled, and legal warnings begin to sound as a storm of litigation takes shape. She realizes that an ocean of distance is no longer a legal safe zone. Harry, the spouse, steps into a pressure-filled space, anxious about being shut out of the flow of information. The only response he receives is a shake of the head and silence, reflecting the frustration of an operator realizing her system is collapsing. She regrets having dragged the entire family into a no-exit game, but survival instinct quickly takes over. Meanwhile, at Windsor, Queen Catherine restores order by protecting the core assets, symbolized by her reading to the heir, an assertion of sovereignty and security. The attack on the bloodline failed, and the family's protective firewall held firm. The event concluded with a system reboot, the coronation of King William V, marking the launch of an upgraded and fully patched Royal Operating System. The institution has survived an extreme stress test. Camilla's ambitions and the schemes from Montecito were eliminated. The system not only endured, but emerged purer and more transparent, ushering in a new era defined by integrity and accountability. From the observation post, the former administrator senses acceptance and trust in the next generation, William, and the solid firewall, Catherine. Despite having to erase memories spanning decades, he executes a hard reset to cleanse the system and hand over to the successors a clean platform where integrity and justice serve as the foundation protecting the kingdom. Camilla, high-risk strategy. Wagering on bold, hazardous moves and ultimately facing the collapse of her support system. Meghan, external offensive strategy. Attempting to exert influence from afar, only to be met with crackdowns from legal barriers and karmic repercussions. Catherine, a resilient defensive strategy. Persevering through stability and integrity, ultimately emerging victorious and becoming a symbol of endurance. The system has undergone a rigorous stress test across 3 generations. Charles, the one who re-established the system. William, the new operator who accepts the weight of the crown. George, the future secured behind a solid firewall of security. Is this a necessary purification process to safeguard the sanctity of duty? Or is it a calculated revenge, a strategic counterstrike by a man deeply wounded by betrayal? Justice or revenge? A sacred duty or earthly pain? Courage or cruelty? The line between them is as thin as a strand of hair. This content is purely for reference, based on unverified hypotheses and public speculation. This content is purely for informational purposes, based on unverified hypotheses and opinions. Let's discuss it further from a customer analysis perspective. Let's discuss it from an objective, analytical perspective. Don't just sit back. Engage with me. Press 1 if you're curious and 0 if you're skeptical. Hit like and subscribe now to join me in uncovering the truth behind the veils.